Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Thomas Nowotny, who has a background in theoretical and mathematical physics. His research works is in computational neuroscience and bio-inspired AI, currently a professor of informatics in the School of Engineering and Informatics. His research is focused around chemical sensing, GPU acceleration of computational neuroscience methods, biomimetic robot controllers, and hybrid computer brain experimentation. And today, the topic of discussion is going to be bio-inspired AI. So, Professor, I really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Why don't we start with a brief introduction, background, what is bio-inspired AI, and share some of your works in the field of bio-inspired AI?
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here today and very happy to start with a bit of an introduction. Bio-inspired AI. Well, as the name says, it is about taking inspiration from biology, and in particular, it's meaning the brain, and making better artificial intelligence. And just to give an example, from my own work, we have looked at the brains of insects and have looked at the structure of the brain and then made parallels to the structure of algorithms in AI. So in particular, we had a model of the insect mushroom body, which is the learning center of many insects. And we noticed that there is this convergence, divergence, convergence property of how it's connected. So you get information from sensors, and we worked on olfaction. So we had chemical sensors in the antenna of the insects. The information gets in the so-called antennal lobe, where the dimension is much smaller of the representation of that information. Then it goes into the mushroom body, and it becomes much larger again to just become then smaller again. So we have this dimension reduction, augmentation, reduction. And we noticed how that kind of maps onto algorithms that we also have developed independently. Have been developed independently in the field, like support vector machines, where there are people doing exactly the same thing. They have this high dimensional pattern they want to recognize, and they go to lower dimensions to filter out noise. Then they go to high dimensions to separate it. And we made this connection between how the brain seems to work and how algorithms seem to work. And I think that's a good example of the kind of thing we're trying to do in bio-inspired AI. We're looking at brains, and they can do certain things very well. And then we see how does the brain do it, and then try to build algorithms that work the same way and are hopefully better and more robust and maybe less expensive in terms of energy consumption than algorithms we come up otherwise with other methods.
When you say that you have worked on an insect, you have structurally kind of understood the brain of an insect. How does that differ from a mammal to a human being? There are various organizations, institutes around the world who are trying to kind of map honeybees. They've done C. elegans worms, then they're on the way to rats and mammals. What's the complexity of moving from an insect to a human brain? And is there the commonality, similarities over there?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So for sure, there are big similarities between all kinds of brains that we wouldn't suspect. So if we look at chemistry, the brain works a lot with chemical transmitters as well as with electrical signals. Then there is a lot of similarity from the worm C. elegans that has only 300 something neurons to the human brain with 6 billion neurons. Structurally no similarity at all, but chemically the transmitters, for example, and the principle how neurons work and how they make spikes and all of that is the same. So we have two things to separate there. There's some aspects, and yeah, as I said, the transmitters and the electrical signals, like their shape and so on, is similar, but the structures, of course, was completely different. Yeah, you can't expect like a simple worm with 300 neurons to have the same structures as a human brain. But nevertheless, we think, and there is evidence for that, that some of the principles how things work are preserved between some animals. So if we come back, go away from the worm, but come back to the insects, and we look at how olfaction works, how smelling works, then there is a big similarity in the first bits of it, where we have the organization of having chemical receptors in the nose, in our case, and on the antenna for the insect. So that physically looks different. but the type of neurons that are in there and how they encode the information, the olfactory information, appears to be very similar. And this structure I was talking about earlier, with this convergence divergence property, that's actually also in mammals and humans. So we see these structures everywhere. So there is some things that are preserved and other things that are new when you go to larger brain systems. You could argue, that they also work a bit different because of it, right? So we can get to that in a moment.
Right. So when you're trying to understand these biological systems, right, from insects to maybe moving on to mammals, what's been the learnings from there, and what have you managed to kind of develop over there? Because there's a field which is really fascinating of neuromorphic computing, where it's brain inspired AI.
Yeah.
Would be great if you could talk about the learnings from there and what can we kind of develop through the learnings of these bio-inspired.
That's a very interesting question, of course. Um, I gave the one example of the structural similarity between machine learning ideas and the insect brain, and that we learn from it how to do a classification well with few data. So this is actually nowadays called extreme learning machines. So that would be one example. I think the more prominent example actually is from the visual system, where people have first looked at how the visual system in mammals is organized. And this is work that from Hubel and Wiesel, where they discovered the so-called receptive fields, as we call it in computational neuroscience, where certain neurons respond to certain shapes in an image, and that they do irrespective of position and size. And therefore, that's this kind of concept that we now have as convolutional neural networks. And this was directly inspired from the work of Hubel and Wiesel. So we have a direct connection where people first looked at the brain and they saw neurons respond to certain things in certain ways, and then they built artificial networks to do the same, and they're still kind of leading edge networks for image recognition today. So these are the examples where it actually has worked really, really well. That said, it's a handful of examples, and then typically the fields diverge a bit again. So it's not as if we could just do neuroscience all day long and machine learning, artificial intelligence solves itself. It's particular examples where it works very well, and then in other examples, it's actually not so helpful. Yeah, so we need to kind of distinguish that. There is a bit of a finesse to this. Where some things work and transfer and other ones don't.
There is this one field of AI which is like data in, data out, but managed to create some really awesome applications, especially these transformer-based large language models.
Yes.
Do you think data in, data out is the right approach to creating a better intelligent machines, or do you think like more understanding a neural network or how a brain functions would be like maybe the correct direction in going towards possibly building machines that are generally aware, generally intelligent? Would that be what's your intuition on that?
I feel that a simple kind of data, as you call it, data in, data out, I would say just a statistical machine, if you want, that digests a lot of input data and builds some statistics and then makes the outputs based on it. Is probably not the full answer. So I would think that we need to think about additional mechanisms how intelligence might work. And I think this is a very deep question, actually, so we can dwell on it a little bit. So if we look at large language models and how they work, just to recap, just very briefly, no, we have a big training set, and they are trained on this training set in an unsupervised fashion by just having to predict left out words. So you have huge amount of data, Wikipedia and novels and whatnot. And they're all fed in and words are left out, and the machine learns to predict the missing words. And then that's used later to make an answer to a query where they predict the next word. And there's a bit more finesse to it to some extent, but this is the essential basis of the whole thing. And when you think about it, is that intelligence? I mean, is that something where we would agree, oh, this is doing something intelligent, or is it just reproducing the training data, in a remixed way. There's a bit of randomness injected into it as well, because it's modeling the probability distribution of the next word and then picking one. So there's some sort of, that's maybe generative, or, what do you say? It's a new creation, yeah. But so it's not just regurgitating the previous text. But nevertheless, do we think this is intelligence? It leads us to this deep question: what is actually intelligence?
There's people at the forefront, who are kind of saying that, even these statistical models, sometimes have these emergent properties of sorts. There was a paper which was released, I think, last year, where people from Microsoft and OpenAI said that these large language models are showing sparks of general intelligent. Do
General
you
intelligence, or consciousness even. Wasn't there a big dispute around that, and someone was fired at Google?
Yeah, from Google, I think somebody was also fired. I mean, again, I mean, maybe I'm kind of pushing onto the same thought. I mean, what's your intuition on that? Do you think maybe these LLMs could possibly have these emergent properties which could lead to maybe general purpose intelligence, or maybe you will need something else altogether?
I think one could argue that they are having general intelligence, in the sense that you can ask any question, even like to do some math, or I'm sure if someone asked it to compose a bit of music, it would be limited, of course, by not being able to play anything, but just putting out text. But I think it could do it. Yeah, there would be some sort of semi-sensible answer to pretty much most questions we could ask it. And also, yeah, and the things you alluded to, where people thought, oh, maybe they have emotions or consciousness, came from people asking questions about it and said, how do you feel today? Or I said, something about, do you feel conscious, and so on. And the text comes out, there are answers, and they are semi-sensible, or maybe very sensible at times. And so we have this conundrum that I don't think we have actually defined what true intelligence, and completely separately what consciousness would look like, what it is. And we're still grappling with the problem that we can't define it. And so as soon as we get these answers back through a text interface, it's very easy to confuse the text that's coming out to come from a conscious being, because it's of course limited to text output. We can't have any other kind of feedback. It is very easy to confuse. And I think people have also argued already that the current language models, like the best ones, let's say ChatGPT upwards, they would probably pass a Turing test, where you couldn't actually distinguish whether you're talking to a human or you're talking to the chatbot, because it's in terms of the language interface, you can't see any difference anymore. But does it mean that they are the same? Obviously, they're not humans, but do they have consciousness? I don't think we can decide that. And we still need to learn a bit more what we mean when we say consciousness. And also, I think, when we say general intelligence, because we haven't really, I think, well defined what that means. It's not, it doesn't have to be human for it, right? But what does it have to have? It can give answers to anything. So is that it? I'm not sure.
Right, and completely, because I mean, I think, yes, maybe there's a lack of definition, like a consensus on what intelligence is. And I think with consciousness, obviously, there's no clarity whatsoever. So maybe, hopefully, when someday, maybe when we kind of get to that, maybe there'll be a road forward to kind of building machines, maybe which are maybe more intelligent, maybe possibly maybe like a human. So would you like to share some of your works? You've done something called Brains on Board. Can you explain what the Brains on Board project is?
Absolutely, yeah. So this was a large project just recently completed that we did with the University of Sheffield and Queen Mary University of London. And we asked this very simple question, and that explains the whole spirit of the project, even though there were many, many aspects then in the project that we worked on. And that was, can we build a robot that at least can do the same that bees can do in terms of navigation? So quite narrow in a sense. We talked about general intelligence here, but we just wanted to build something that can navigate the world like a bee can. And to make that a bit more clear for the listeners, what can bees do? If you this has been studied for a long while, and people have found that bees can do several kilometers of flying away from the hive and then return to it, just based on the internal navigation memory of the outgoing route. And that's something people might be surprised, but if you switch off GPS, that's something that robots are just absolutely unable to do at this point. We have a lot of ideas around it. Yeah, there's this whole idea of synchronous localization and mapping, where we have robots that build up maps of the environment and then try to return. But this tends to be quite unreliable in an open kind of natural environment. It works okay if you're on roads and you have more or less perpendicular roads and you can build up easily, or you have corridors in the building, even though there are problems there too. But in an open environment like fields and the forest, it's very, very difficult. And of course, these bees, they need to do it at different times of the day. So the sun might be shining at some point and the clouds come out at another. So the visual environment actually changes it hugely. And this kind of question, how can we build something that can do that like a bee does it, was behind the whole project. And so we had people doing experiments with bees, other people building robots, and then other people, yet again, including myself, looking at the algorithms and how we can simulate them very efficiently so they can run on the robots.
Lovely. How cool is that? I think the bees and these ants have something called a swarm intelligence. What they're doing together is really, really cool. It really kind of is there a work towards scaling this up from going from honeybee to maybe doing larger scale biomimetic robots? Is there anything in the offerings?
And we're certainly pushing in that direction. So we want to go from individual brains, individual bees and robots to swarms of bees and robots, which is much more powerful, of course, as you said, just based on that they can collaborate and then cover whole areas of discovery and exploration. And if they're individually intelligent enough for survival, as a whole, that it can be very powerful in achieving goals. So let's say if we were to use them for search and rescue, that would be extremely powerful. And the other applications, especially in like dangerous environments, and where this would be really, really cool. Some people even think about extraterrestrial exploration. So what if the Mars rover actually had been intelligent enough to explore by itself, so you wouldn't have to steer it around? We could have learned a lot more about Mars that way, right? I mean, we wouldn't put a swarm up there maybe, but a more intelligent robot, that would be certainly something we'd be interested in doing. So that's actually kind of more forward-looking things. People want to go back to the moon. That could also be interesting, because there you really benefit from your robot being autonomous, so doing things all by its own. You give it a mission, and it explores on its own. You don't have to send signals all the time. I think for Mars that was already quite an issue because you have this minute delay for any kind of control signals.
Right.
There. So that's interesting areas. But yes, swarms are interesting. We have an ongoing project where students also looking at how ants are building their nest, which could be a quite interesting area. It's more in the kind of, let's say, foundational science side of things, because I don't think we'd ever use that to build houses or so. But nevertheless, it's quite interesting to see how they interact to solve problems as a collective, as a swarm.
Right, right. You mentioned about autonomous robots. At this point in time, currently, I think what's at the cutting edge of science. People who are like from Boston Dynamics to possibly Sanctuary AI to most of them are teleoperated robots. They are basically teleoperated. Where human is kind of like navigating the robots to kind of do these basic functionalities.
Hmm.
What's your intuition over here? I mean, how do we get to like an autonomous robot? What would be the pathway or roadmap to an autonomous robot?
How do we make them do something, on their own volition or with minimal instruction? That's exactly the questions we are after with our navigation work and other insect-inspired things, because we think that even the simple behaviors and innate behaviors of insects aren't fully implemented yet, and we can't operate at that level, as I alluded to earlier. So, but what we need there is an understanding and finding of algorithms that are not yeah, because I'm bio-inspired, of course, I'm biased here, but that are not construed in an artificial way. We could think, oh, what we need for the robots to do something is to kind of plan out what they need to do, and they need to have this kind of planning structure in their controllers. And I think we don't need that. We need an understanding how you can translate an overall goal into the right actions in a more kind of bio-inspired, natural way, and understand how humans do that. Yeah? So how do we decide if the goal is to get food, yeah, where to go and how to obtain the food, right? So these kind of simple questions are still a bit open. And it's certainly not a question. I mean, if you maybe we turn it out to something easier. Yeah, what if I want to pick up a glass and drink a bit of water? So am I planning with my hand, okay, the glass is there, what's the optimal smallest trajectory from here to there? So then do I translate that into kind of joint angles by calculating what that does to the hand? Yeah, you see what I mean? Like this kind of whole controlled way of getting to the glass and picking it up is not quite, I think, how humans do it. We have kind of intrinsic motion paradigms that just tells us how to go and pick it up. And yeah, getting these, bio-inspired algorithms that are simpler than calculating every angle, that's the thing we need to get the more autonomous system. So yeah, there's lots to do, lots to understand, and it's an exciting time to work on it.
Right. Yeah. So possibly we maybe need like a world building of sorts where we do virtual world and we let those agents inside and train them.
Mm.
But there are a lot like NVIDIA has a sim. They train these robots in these virtual environments. Is maybe like training these agents in virtual environments a route forward to creating these autonomous robots?
Yeah, that's a very nice approach, and can be very powerful because, of course, in a virtual environment, you can simulate many more hours of training and experience than you could do with a real robot. A real robot would be tied to real time and could just do like one thing at a time. With these simulations, you can run hundreds, thousands of robots in parallel and achieve a much more. And I do think that's a really promising direction, and I really like it. On the other hand, there's always the reality gap, as they call it, where quite often you find that you achieve something in simulation and it's very, very good. And then you put it onto a real robot and it doesn't work as well. It might work okay, but not quite as well. Sometimes it fails spectacularly as well. But this reality gap is, of course, something people have known about for years now, and there are ways of addressing it. You put noise into your simulations, you do different kinds of simulations, and in the end, when they get realistic enough and you do the right cautionary measures of that kind, you can translate into the real world, and then can be very powerful, as we said. It's a very, very nice approach. I like it a lot.
Right. So these learnings, of or senses, what are the applications you think that might come out of it? So I've been invested in virtual reality, metaverse, and the I think the end goal of metaverse or virtual reality is to kind of simulate, the virtual world. Which can be indistinguishable from the real world, but right now the only things that we can simulate is basically sight and sound. We do like
Yeah.
very good visual depiction, and plus sound also. We can do ambisonic spatial sound, which is exactly how we humans hear. But we've got, I mean, and we have these haptic feedback suits which can gives us a little idea of maybe touch and feel, but there's nothing much in this area of smelling. So what are the applications that which you are like really excited about, which is going to be maturing and possibly going from lab to the market, which you see?
I think today the applications are still in the area of sensing more than in the generating of stimuli. Even though I would agree with you, that would be extremely exciting, and I have seen there is a whole kind of field of trying to do that, but they are struggling because of the type of stimuli that odors are. As I was just explaining, I just imagine you wanted to do an olfactory display, um, and you want to actually be versatile. So let's say you have a movie and you want to add an olfaction track, yeah, like a soundtrack. You would have an olfaction track, like with smells to make it super realistic. The issue there, of course, is that you have so many chemicals, you can't just have a huge bank of chemicals that they then release at the right time. That would be impossible. So one would need to find some principles how you could replace the perception of certain chemicals with a simpler set of chemicals. So in the sense how a screen is just made of red, green, and blue, and then we mix the colors up, you mix the odors up? And that's something that I think might be impossible, and that's where they're stuck. Right. So the applications that are coming online and are interesting are more on the sensing side, where it seems that at least you can build sensors, and as with the nose, with a finite number of sensors, even though you need still many. So typically we're talking about arrays of at least 10, 20 different types. So not just three colors is just not the in odors you need more. But you get, yeah, the so-called electronic noses, and there are interesting applications for that in all over the place. So I've seen them used for quality control on foods, yeah, for wine making, beer making. People have tried it, and there was some success. Um, they was also want to use them for detection, where we now use dogs. So let's say you want to detect drugs at the airport, or you want to detect explosives, mines in the field. People have started building instruments for that are directly inspired by noses, by building these so-called e-noses, electronic noses. The only problem with that so far is that they haven't been as sensitive and as fast in their response as actual noses of animals. So we're still not quite there yet in terms of the technology for the sensing to build something that actually is competitive. So most people still default to the dog, or some people have also tried other things, bees and, and other animals. But I think we're getting there. I've seen in Australia they already had a breathalyzer that was more based on the principles of olfaction than on the classic alcohol measurements. So I think there are applications that are coming through now.
You do some works in GPU acceleration of computational neuroscience models. Can you talk about that?
Maybe just for background to start off, I mean, GPUs obviously are the graphical processing units in computers that were built for the purpose of doing 3D graphics. But then NVIDIA came out around 2007 with the CUDA interface, which allows now to run more general workloads, parallel workloads on the GPUs. And since then, it has been a big success story, especially for AI, where people now compute all kinds of things on GPUs much faster than on the normal central processing unit. And the magic there is that GPUs have this massive number of parallel cores, and it's fairly broad bandwidth to the memory. So you can do massive compute in parallel if your problem is parallelizable, that is. And the memories are also sufficiently fast for serving up enough data to these compute cores. And my interest then from the beginning was that I was doing computational neuroscience simulations of brain models, and they are massively parallel and parallelizable because they consist out of neurons that actually also do some computation inside that is non-trivial, which is something you need when you want to parallel something. You can't have too much communication. You need to have a lot of compute happening locally on each core, and then only a bit of communication to be efficient. And that seemed to be a good fit. So I started using them for my own simulations. And then out of that, we developed a whole research direction of how to do this efficiently and automatize the process of taking the description of a simulation and putting it in a shape where it really fits well on a GPU and runs very, very efficiently. And out of that, we generated this framework. We called it GEN, GPU Enhanced Neural Networks. And most recently, we also have a new variant that's called Emergent, which formulates a bit more in machine learning terms. So one is more for computational neuroscience, the other one is an interface for machine learning. They're both using the same core inside. And we can now simulate with this, especially spiking neural networks, so the more biorealistic type of neural networks, in a very efficient and fast way. And that's very useful for our own research, but of course it could also be useful for others. So we have tried to make it as accessible as possible for anyone to use. This is openly available under a GPL license, and we hope that it could become. I mean, this is maybe a bit ambitious, but we are hoping it could become something like the TensorFlow or PyTorch for spiking neural networks, for biorealistic networks. That's our big dream, to just have this system that will accelerate everybody's research in the bio-inspired AI area.
So congratulations, wish you the very best. And I hope it kind of becomes that, because yes, I think we need more of these open source ecosystems to kind of, keep on encouraging, more research work going at the cutting edge of technology, because I think science and technology has been the only tool which has kept on taking the human race forward one step at a time. And I think we're sitting in a fantastic point of time where all of these tech stack is converging. What we need is, rather than being siloed, we need the researchers, institutions around the world to join hand. But unfortunately, we live in a capitalistic world, top down hierarchical, where we run behind profit at any cost rather than the common good. But I hope that we create a world which is more inclusive and diverse and enable and empower everyone. So we wish you the very best for that. Can you explain your work on hybrid computer brain experimentation? What are the key research questions being addressed in that area?
Yeah, so that takes us into a somewhat completely different area. We're much closer to the actual neuroscience experimentation that people do to find out more about the internal mechanisms, how neurons work in the brain. So I've done this work together with colleagues in the life sciences here at Sussex, especially Professor Georg-August who works in snails. So he's looking at snail brains and trying to find out how they are able to learn from one-time experiences. And this is actually something, it relates to our earlier discussion, even though it's totally different in a sense. But in snails, they could show that if you pair a certain taste with a punishment or a reward once, they kind of learn it for days or maybe even for a lifetime. That's something that our machine learning models can't do. They need tons of examples before they learn something, right? So how does that work? That's one of these questions George is asking. And now I've joined and we've used these hybrid systems where you basically do the following thing. You have a model of part of the brain, let's say just an individual neuron. And you can simulate it in a computer, of course. And with today's computers, you can simulate it at least at real time, but potentially much faster than real time if you want to. And with electrophysiology, we have the possibility to measure the behavior of a neuron. So we can insert an electrode into the neuron and directly measure the voltage of the neuron membrane at also in real time. And we can inject currents through such an electrode into the same neuron to manipulate what's happening. And that allows us now to couple the model running in the computer directly in a closed loop with the neuron that's in the brain. So we can run a simulation of a synapse and another neuron and yet another synapse in the computer. And then for the brain, it looks like it is essentially like there is an additional neuron in that brain, because we're kind of injecting the currents coming from the simulated neuron as a physical current into that neuron. It now has a simulated neuron partner. Now you can see where this is going. So with this, we can probe what if the brain had an additional neuron here and it would be doing this? What would happen? Or can we just make, like, delete the neuron from the brain by taking it away and then connecting this artificial neuron to the other neurons it was connected to? Can we restore what that neuron was doing? And that helps us to get a fuller understanding of what these neurons are doing in the circuit. So it's a very kind of smart, but also a bit finicky way of trying to find out more about what's happening in the brain, and potentially also of finding ways of replacing function that is lost in the brain, and and looking at interventions like that. So and nowadays computers, we can then scale it up, and you could put a whole circuit extra, a simulated neural circuit into the computer and interface it. And so we've been able to ask very, very interesting questions with this. Maybe I give an example. Most recently, I've worked with someone in the Netherlands, and his idea was to now test in mammalian brains what the function of bistability of perception might be. And he went into the visual cortex and simulated inhibitory connections between pyramidal neurons, which presumably are the main neurons carrying information processing there, to look at the bistability of the activity as a proxy for the bistability of percepts that we have in visual illusions. And he found that he could make the circuit such that the interaction of these two neurons was like the perceptual interaction between two percepts. And this is very indirect kind of proof, but he's trying to make the case with the dynamic lamp experiment that the percepts might be very physical competition of individual neurons or neuron groups, probably in the visual cortex, rather than some abstract, thinking competition between different percepts. You see what I mean? Like there's probably actually it's just a physical competition of which neurons can be active, which then corresponds to the perceptual bistability of seeing things in one way or another. Yeah, so it's a very interesting kind of intricate experimentation you can do with this, and of course people then think, oh, in the future it's going to be cyborgs, but we're far away from that. For now, it's a method to find out more about the brain.
There are millions of people right now who are suffering from neural conditions. Do you think your learnings can help in the neural healthcare, and maybe also because you're speaking about simulating these brains. There are various institutions around the world. There's the Human Brain Connectome project. There's the Blue Brain project. We're trying to kind of simulate the brain. Maybe talk about peers who are doing cutting edge research in the space of neuroscience, and what would be the healthcare applications out of the R&D.
Yes, you mentioned already a few of the big projects that are working on getting more closer towards the human brain and human brain-sized simulations, very realistic simulations. And a lot of is happening there in this area, which is very exciting. So we are now having some simulations that have been brain size, even though they're typically not very detailed, and also they're often just lumped together the neurons into kind of one structure rather than having a kind of modular brain as we have it. So, but nevertheless, it's a huge achievement to get to that size. On the other end of the spectrum, we're now getting models that are not that large, because they're just more coarse-grained, as we call it. So we lump neurons together and do so-called neural field models. But there are now models there that are specific, like individualized to individual persons. So you take measurements of their brains and you make a model of this particular brain, not just some generic brain model. And this is all working in the so-called virtual brain, TVB, the virtual brain, which is also quite exciting. And if you look at connections to healthcare and medicine, I think these will be the ones that will come out through first as very useful. So you could, in principle, even though probably our models right now aren't quite detailed and accurate enough to yet do it, but you could simulate interventions like if you look at epilepsy and a neurosurgeon is planning to remove an epifocal center from the brain. So the area of the brain, and this is literally what you have to do with very severe cases of epilepsy. You have to remove the area of the brain that causes the epileptic seizures. So nowadays, what people do is just I mean, it's also already quite advanced, but yet not model-based, where they put electrodes in, they try to locate where the epileptic seizures are coming from by just measuring, where is it first? Yeah, where does it start? But you could be more sophisticated than that when you have these individualized models, and if they are accurate enough, you could simulate how the seizures are coming on based on the data you're measuring. And you would have a much better understanding then of if you simulate then removing bits of it, what the outcome of the actual surgery might be. And I think there are, many things that we will be seeing coming on fairly soon, where people use brain simulations to predict the interventions you do on the brain. Similar, maybe also with deep brain stimulation, no? Where you use stimulation in the brain to avoid epileptic seizures. There's there's also at the moment it's very ad hoc. You try something else and the surgeon just turns a dial until it works. Yeah, that could be done much more sophisticated and then probably more efficiently with less energy injected into the brain with the same results. Um, where you make a simulation of that brain and then you look what's the best stimulation we should do to really help this patient with the epilepsy. And I think there's a lot of exciting things that can be done in that space. So in terms of applications, that's an area I think that's to be watched. It's not something I do myself, obviously, but I find it quite exciting. And then if we can eventually do that with large brain simulations, yeah, where we have detailed simulations of individual brains, I guess in the future it will come. We're far away from it yet, but it will come. Then we can do that even better. And there will be more interventions that we can then predict or develop really to help people with brain disorders. So
Right,
yeah,
right,
I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in that space.
right, right. Any research updates from Sussex AI that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, but one thing I want to share with the audience is the existence of Sussex AI. And so to just explain in a few words for people who haven't heard of it, and as much as I would hope everyone has heard of it, I suspect not everyone has. Sussex AI is a very new center that we've just founded, and we have our first launch event next week, where we're bringing together all the research in AI, even like in applied AI, together with fundamental AI, with bio-inspired AI and robotics. We bring it all together into one center, realizing the potential we have, and of course the trends today, where there's a lot of interest in AI. Sussex has been doing AI for years and years. We have a long history. Geoff Hinton, for example, was at Sussex at some point. And there's been a big history of the so-called evolutionary robotics, which is related to AI. And we have been doing it a bit under the radar, so not many people might have heard of it. And now we're trying to kind of put it together and have Sussex AI to highlight what the good work is actually happening here. And we have some really exciting groups inside of Sussex AI. We have talked a lot about biomimetic AI, so that we have covered, yeah. But we have also a strong group in language. They're not necessarily building large language models, but they have developed very interesting techniques of similar methodology to do things like sentiment analysis, yeah, where you look at Twitter feeds and you predict certain things. For example, they can predict the outcome of elections, or they have predicted the outcome of talent shows like the X Factor. I don't know if you've heard about that's maybe a British thing, but where they look at the things people tweet on Twitter, or now I should say X probably, so they post on X, and then they have algorithms to find out basically with the same kind of language modeling methodology like the large language models today, what those tweets actually mean, and then you can automatically group them to get sentiment. So you could say, oh, this tweet means they like the candidate. This means, that the singing was bad, and so on. And and then you can build up a prediction of the vote, and it can be quite accurate. I've seen demonstrations where they had a real-time ticker running that predicted how the vote would go, and it was quite accurate in the end. So and you could see how it related to the performance of the candidate. Yeah, so you see, oh wow, they forgot their lines and they're not very good, and boom, sentiment goes down, right? And so on. So very exciting stuff happening in that space. Of course, predicting the outcome of a talent show is a bit of fun games, yeah. But when it comes to election, that of course becomes more serious. But you can do similarly very useful things with it. And they have looked at, for example, predicting hate speech on social media. And you could look into some things. I mean, we've had all these effects where social media were used when riots happened in certain areas. There was this case in London years back, and so there's some exciting work happening in that area. But you can then also work on all kinds of other things that people do in Sussex AI. We have people working on satellite images to predict crop yields and drought conditions. We have people looking at fair AI. How do you define fairness in an AI system, and how do you enforce it? So lots of interesting stuff happening, and I would encourage everyone who is interested at all in Sussex AI to go to our website and check out what's happening here.
But thank you for explaining. I'm sure I will definitely leave the links behind this. I think it's an exciting space. Obviously, AI is in the hype cycle. And I think it's gone through its various winters, but right now, obviously, it's doing some amazing things in across all different sectors. And you spoke about how Sussex AI is developing applications across different industry sectors. My last question to you: what's the moonshot that you're going after? Because I think the next 10 years is going to be like super exciting, possibly maybe like a little scary if we don't go at the right direction. So what's the moonshot that you are going after? And would you like to leave us with some trends on what could be the impact or disruption which is going to come because linked to AI?
Yeah, so what's the big moonshot? I said earlier, I really am a technology person, so I'm not necessarily having one big moonshot in my mind of a product I would like to make. But in terms of technology, I would hope that our Gen software will be the next TensorFlow, as I already said, right? That's one big thing, and we're really pushing hard on that front. But we're also working now with making our algorithms then suitable for neuromorphic hardware. And that's something I'm very interested in, and is my other big push at the moment. We want to develop algorithms with our bio-inspired approach that will run on novel computers like the Intel Loihi, or maybe the Spinnaker 2 system that's coming online, or potentially other systems like Dynapse coming out of Zurich. There's these new computers coming up that are a bit more neural inspired, or based on the inspiration from the brain. And our big ambition is to build applications that run better and more energy efficient on these systems than what we have on the GPUs today. Even though I'm a GPU person, I don't deny it. I think the future lies in these novel systems, but so far they've only played catch up. And my big ambition is to find this kind of killer application where we can finally demonstrate that it's better on the neuromorphic system than anything we can do on a normal computer. That's my big ambition there. And we're getting closer and closer, but we're not there yet. So far we're still playing catch up. In terms of the big world, what everyone's doing, I do think we'll be on large language models for a bit longer, and it's going to be an exciting development to see how people will use them. I think they are at the cusp of where everyone's going to use them, and we need to see that we don't go off in the wrong direction of misusing them, which will happen, but we need to rein that in to an extent where AI still is a force for good. I want to see it to be a force for good and not for some of these questions it could be.
Right. Professor, really appreciate you taking time being part of the podcast. We wish you the very best for your Gen software. And yes, I think we're sitting in a fantastic point of time if we all come together and we have a common goal, common goods, goal towards creating better quality products, services, and solutions to accelerate human potential into the future. I think it'll be really good, and yeah, I hope that it goes into the hands of the good rather than the bad. So really appreciate you taking time being part of the podcast. To my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye bye. Thank you. Really appreciate this.
Thank you very much for having me, Eddie. It was a pleasure.